Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks, is there an association between personality disorders and intelligence? Now, this is a controversial topic that has received some attention in the research literature. To understand this relationship, we first have to look at the relationship between personality traits in general and intelligence, because personality disorders are conceptualized as extreme manifestations of personality traits. So I like to conceptualize personality through the 5-factor model. I remember the 5 factors through the acronym OCEAN: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So looking at these 5 traits, we see that openness to experience is positively correlated with intelligence. Now, there's this facet on openness to experience called ideas. Sometimes it's also referred to as intellect. But no matter what we call it, it's essentially the same thing as intellectual curiosity. So it's not surprising that openness to experience, because of this facet, would be positively associated with intelligence. Essentially, intellectual curiosity helps build crystallized intelligence. So people high in this facet would have more general knowledge. This is because they tend to invest a lot of energy into learning new information. But cognitive reasoning ability, or fluid intelligence, doesn't really have a connection to intellectual curiosity, and it doesn't have one to openness to experience in general either. Now, conscientiousness and neuroticism are both negatively correlated with intelligence. Now, the neuroticism findings are not really that surprising, because high neuroticism would hurt somebody's performance when taking the actual intelligence test, which means those who are high in neuroticism are not actually necessarily less intelligent, but rather they're less effective at taking intelligence tests. Now, the conscientiousness finding, though, is quite surprising, as generally conscientiousness is thought of as being positively associated with intelligence, because it's also strongly associated with other factors that have a connection to intelligence, like productivity, achievement striving, and competence. So here's how we explain this negative correlation. Sometimes individuals who are less intelligent in a particular group of peers will work to increase their conscientiousness. That way they can compensate for the lower intelligence. So this really underscores an important feature of correlations, and that is correlation is not causation. We see this relationship between conscientiousness and intelligence, and there may be a tendency to think that the conscientiousness influences the intelligence, but it seems as though the intelligence actually influences the conscientiousness. Extroversion is associated with lower crystallized intelligence, but only slightly lower fluid intelligence, and we see no association between agreeableness and intelligence. So as we can already see from looking at the personality traits, when we look at personality disorders and we see an association with intelligence, it's hard to know if that relationship is a function of test-taking style or a true difference in intelligence. This could be a matter of measurement error. Another possibility is that the association is there because of the personality disorder comorbidity. So the other disorders that are comorbid, that tend to co-occur with personality disorders, may explain differences in intelligence. The relationship between personality disorders and intelligence has been studied many times, and we see a lot of conflicting results. I'm going to go through some of the results. I will point out where there's a high level of agreement, a low level of agreement, or disagreement in the research literature, and I'll give my opinion for each of the 10 personality disorders. So is the relationship real? Is there really an association with intelligence? Or do other factors explain the association? Or perhaps really there's no association at all, no matter how we look at it. So again, I'll kind of go through all that for each of the 10 personality disorders. Now, all 10 personality disorders have been shown to be negatively correlated with processing speed. The more extreme presentation of a personality disorder, the lower the processing speed. Now, it's important to recognize here, though, that not all of the personality disorders have a statistically significant negative correlation with intelligence, and I'll indicate whether there was significance or not when I go through each personality disorder. Why is this important, though? When you measure the correlation between two variables, even if the variables have nothing to do with one another, you wouldn't expect to get a perfect 0, right? So for example, with R value, the Pearson product moment correlation coefficient, we wouldn't expect R to equal 0. We would always expect to see either a small negative or a small positive correlation. With this in mind, we use statistical significance to decide how likely it is that the result, the correlation being a little bit negative or a little bit positive, was due to random error. Another point here, just because the result is not due to random error, but rather represents a real association, that doesn't mean that it's an important relationship. To see how important an association is, we use effect size. That's the measurement we use for that. So we have significance and effect size. Typically, if a result is not statistically significant, we don't even look at the effect size. So if we're not fairly certain that a result was not caused by random error, we don't interpret the effect size. But here I will be mentioning the effect sizes just so you can compare the personality disorders to one another. Generally, in the area of personality and intelligence, we rarely see anything but very small to small effect sizes, and once in a while we see a small to medium effect size. Now, one way effect size is measured is by looking at the variance explained. So specifically in the situation when comparing personality disorders and intelligence, we're looking at the proportion of variance that intelligence explains in personality disorder trait scores. So I'll give an example of this. So if the proportion of variance with any particular personality disorder was 10%, that would mean that 10% of the personality disorder trait score could be explained by intelligence. So if you moved intelligence up by 10 points, you would only expect the personality disorder trait score to change by 1 point. With that in mind, we know that intelligence explains about 2.6% of the variance in personality disorder trait scores. That's from one particular study published in 2014 that examined all of the personality disorders together along with intelligence. So as I go through the 10 personality disorders, that's an important number to keep in mind. The average variance explained, again, 2.6%. As I go through these personality disorders, I'm going to refer to the variance explained as the effect size. So I'm really going to use these terms interchangeably in this context. Now let's take a look at the 10 personality disorders and their relationship to intelligence. Now the construct of intelligence is complex. Most studies simply break it down in terms of fluid versus crystallized intelligence. I mentioned that before. Fluid intelligence, again, is one's ability to reason, solve problems, use critical thinking skills, and crystallized intelligence is knowledge. So intelligence essentially stays stable throughout the lifespan because even though fluid intelligence decreases as people age, crystallized intelligence increases. So let's start with the first personality disorder. This is paranoid personality disorder. Here we see a negative correlation, right? So as we see more paranoid personality disorder traits, we see a lower level of intelligence, but the relationship is not statistically significant. The effect size is 1.8%. So the theory as to why we see any relationship here would be that individuals who are paranoid are suspicious of the test. So they're distracted by fears and anxiety. So I think this relationship can be explained by a testing effect, right? The testing style is different. How about schizoid personality disorder? Here we see a positive correlation, specifically for crystallized intelligence. So perhaps a detachment from emotions is good when taking intelligence tests, at least in terms of crystallized intelligence, but we see a negative correlation for fluid intelligence. In that 2014 study I was talking about, we see there is a statistically significant relationship here, and the effect size was 2.9%. Now, there is disagreement in the research literature with schizoid personality disorder. Most research shows a negative correlation for general intelligence, and that is probably what's happening. It could be due to a testing effect, but it actually could be a true difference as well. Schizoid personality disorder is on a continuum with schizophrenia, and schizophrenia, of course, has disorganized thinking as one of the symptoms, so it's not surprising that there could be a real relationship here with schizoid personality disorder. This brings me to schizotypal personality disorder. We see here a statistically significantly negative correlation with fluid intelligence and an effect size of 2.5%. There is a high level of agreement in the literature regarding this personality disorder. Again, if we think about this disorder on a continuum with schizophrenia, these results would not be surprising. So that covers cluster A, personality pathology. Now moving to cluster B and starting with antisocial. Here we see a non-significant negative correlation with intelligence, an effect size of only 0.4%. The theory here is that there's a lack of investment into taking the test. So if somebody has this disorder, they're not really going to take the idea of testing too seriously. But given the results we see here, I'm not sure there's really any relationship at all with antisocial personality disorder. Now moving on to borderline personality disorder. Now here we see a statistically significant negative correlation with general intelligence with an effect size of 5.9%. By far the highest effect size observed for any of the personality disorders. On top of that, we see a high level of agreement about this type of finding. So what's causing this relationship? I think there may be a test-taking style effect here. If somebody is upset and impulsive, they won't do well with the actual intelligence testing, but there also could be a true difference. It's not really clear from what we see in the research literature. So this brings me to narcissistic personality disorder. Here we see findings that show a positive and a negative correlation, right? Different studies. Now, looking at the 2014 study, which I think is a relatively good study, we see a non-significant result and an effect size of only 0.5%. Now, this is a controversial relationship because this is the only personality disorder where several studies show a positive relationship. But I doubt there's really any relationship here. But if there is truly a positive correlation between NPD and intelligence, it may be explained by the high level of enthusiasm that we would see in the test-taking style. The individual with this disorder may want to show off, so they might, again, invest a lot of work in trying to make that score just a little bit higher. Now looking at the last cluster B personality disorder, histrionic, here we see a non-significant result and an effect size of only 0.9%. There's probably no relationship here at all. So this brings me to cluster C, personality pathology. I'll get started with avoidant personality disorder. Now here we see mixed results. We see some positive correlations. So there's this theory that low extroversion and higher neuroticism function as a motivator rather than something that would detract from test-taking ability. But other studies have shown a negative correlation. In the 2014 study, we see a non-significant finding with an effect size of only 0.9%. My guess would be that there's really no relationship here. Now moving on to dependent personality disorder. Here we have mixed findings. Some studies show a positive correlation with crystallized intelligence, but other studies show a negative correlation with general intelligence. From the 2014 study, we see a non-significant finding with an effect size of 1.6%. I would say there's probably no relationship here between dependent personality disorder and intelligence. And that brings me to the last personality disorder, Obsessive-Compulsive personality disorder, OCPD. Here we see a negative correlation to intelligence. Now, in a way, this isn't really surprising because, again, conscientiousness and neuroticism are both negatively correlated with intelligence, and OCPD has both high conscientiousness and high neuroticism. I would think this result is really a function of the test-taking style and not a function of true differences in intelligence. The perfectionism, again, that high conscientiousness, is going to lead to mistakes in taking an intelligence test. And of course, the high neuroticism will as well, right? And they can combine to make it to where somebody's really anxious as they go through each item on that type of test. In terms of the 2014 study, we see non-significant finding with an effect size of 1.3%. So I would probably say there's really no relationship here between OCPD and intelligence. So looking at the personality disorders from the perspective of the three clusters, so just in general, looking at cluster A, B, and C, well, it would seem that cluster A may have the most important relationship with intelligence, that negative relationship. In terms of cluster B, only borderline personality disorder really stands out. Again, by far, the strongest negative relationship of any personality disorder, not just the ones in cluster B. And in terms of cluster C, we see mixed results. I don't really think there's anything going on here with this cluster. No true difference in intelligence. I think that overall, kind of looking at all 10 personality disorders, General distress probably explains a lot. Test-taking style is influenced by how somebody feels, and if somebody has one or more personality disorders and other possible comorbid mental disorders, it makes sense that this would have some effect on their test-taking performance. Now, I know whenever I talk about topics like personality and intelligence, there will be a variety of opinions. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.